Okay, so today I'm going to do a video on how to ice a cake, and we're going to use the crumb method, the crumb coat method. So I've got an 8-inch cake, and I'm going to put it on my cake board, and then I'm going to take my serrated knife and I'm going to cut my cake, and I want to cut the dome off. You'll notice that I have the knife inside the cake itself, but I'm actually turning the turntable, and between the turntable and the knife it's doing all the work for me. Once I get all the way around, I'm just going to simply remove it. Now you can either hold on to this for you can dry it out, crumble it up, dry it out, use it on the side of your cake. You can use it for cake balls. We used to do rum balls where I used to work. Now I'm going to cut it, and I'm just going to, again, I'm going to draw the knife into the cake, and then I'm going to start letting the cake or the turntable do all of the work for me. I really don't want to do a sawing motion out because number one, when you get to the end of the cake, when you're doing that sawing motion, a lot of times it'll break the cake, and also when you go to do something with your cake, you end up with ripples on the inside of the cake when you're doing that sawing motion. So I don't like doing the sawing motion a lot. I'm going to now just turn my cake upside down because quite frankly I got a natural cylinder already, and that's the shape I want my cake to be in. Now something I do for my beginner cake decorators is I will take a little mark on my board, and that mark shows me how I've taken the cake apart. So I can take my cake off and I can spin it around and I can do whatever, and I can bring that mark back in front of me, and the cake will go back together exactly the same way it came apart. So I've got about 3 cups of icing, which is what you really need for an 8 to 10 inch cake, and I'm just going to put some icing on the inside. Guys, I'm not doing a filling, so I don't need to do a ring around the outside of it, and I'm just going to start spreading my icing on the inside. You don't want so much icing that your cake is going to slip all over the place, and always stay in front. Have a mound of icing in front when you're spreading your icing. That way you don't end up with a lot of cake crumbs on the bottom of your spatula. So now that I'm all the way around the outside, I'm just going to simply bring that mark right back in front of me, and boom, the cake goes back exactly the same way it came apart. Now, if you're right-handed, you're going to take your spatula and you are going to come onto the left-hand side of your cake. We're going to do a very, very thin layer of icing. Part of the reason why we're doing this thin layer is because we're just simply trying to get those cake crumbs and locking them down. Now, if you're left-handed, you are not going to be over here trying to ice your cake. You are going to be over on this side. And yes, it's going to feel awkward for you guys at the very beginning, but once you get used to this position, it'll seem very natural. You'll notice that my finger is down the blade of the spatula. You want that spatula to become an extension of your index finger. You're going to have so much more control over your cake. Actually, more control over your spatula. Your cake has control over you. And then once I get all the way around, you notice I'm always keeping that little mound in front of me. Once I get all the way around, I'm just simply going to come in a nice smooth motion around the outside of the cake, and then I'm going to take any icing that had crumbs in it already, and I'm going to use that on top of my cake. Again, a nice thin layer, because what we're trying to do right now is just lock down those crumbs. Get it completely covered one more time around the outside. And then with these little ridges that I've created, what I'm going to do, clean off the bottom of my spatula, and I'm going to just take that and give it a quick snap of my wrist across the cake to get rid of those. You're not coming up and around the cake. You're just going to lay this down and give it a quick little snap. Once we're completely around the cake, now we're going to put it into our freezer, and we're going to let it sit in there for 5 to 10 minutes. Don't let it sit in there any longer, because if you let it sit in there for a really prolonged period of time, the icing gets too cold, the cake gets too cold, and then when you try to go put your presentation layer of icing onto the cake, it's going to set up as you're trying to spread it. So okay, so we want to get rid of any loose crumbs, and I just will take a pastry brush and brush away all my loose crumbs, because, you know, at this point I just really don't want to introduce any of that back into my presentation layer. And then once I've done that, I'm just going to take a very small spatula, and around the outside of my cake, I'm just going to start turning it to get rid of some of the crumbs and the icing that are there. I'm going to put more icing down, but really what I'm trying to get rid of are the crumbs right now. And I've got a paper towel, so I'm just going to clean that spatula with the paper towel and get all this out of my way, because the fewer crumbs I have, the fewer crumbs that are going to mess with me later. Okay, so now I'm all the way around. I'm going to beat my icing once again, because as it sits, it starts to form air cells, or I should say the air cells start to get larger. There's no forming going on, but I really kind of take my spatula and I flatten it out, and I beat the air cells out. And so once I've done that, I'm going to just start adding a really good thick layer of icing on the side. Don't worry about how pretty it looks. You just want to make sure you have a mound of icing in front of you when you're spreading this. Once I've gotten all the way around, I'm going to put a little bit of icing on top. I'm going to start spreading the icing on top. Again, it doesn't have to be a work of art yet. Just make sure that you have icing in front of your spatula. Okay, so at this point I'm just going to take my spatula, I'm going to put it down, and I'm just going to turn my cake. Try not to take a hole in the middle of your cake like I just did. Once again, don't drive yourself too crazy with this, because we're going to now take our bench scraper And I will tell you, I fought doing this method for many years. And I really like this method now. I'm going to take that bench scraper, and I want it in front of me with a right angle. And I'm just going to leave it in the same position. And I'm going to turn my cake round and round until I like the way my cake looks on the side. Sometimes it takes a couple of passes around the outside of the cake to get these large air pockets. Don't stick your hand in your cake like I just did. But sometimes it takes a couple of passes around the cake to get rid of those large air pockets that are there. And since I put my finger in there, I'm going to do a third pass around the outside of the cake. But that gives you a nice smooth edge. And then I'm just simply going to take my spatula across the top, and I'm going to stamp that wrist just like I did with the rest of it. Get rid of it. Bill is over here making me laugh, so I messed up. Now, I see a lot of you get really OCD about it. Guys, a lot of times you're going to put designs on the cake. You're going to put sprays. You're covering it up completely. So it doesn't have to be absolutely smooth on top. Bring it to a point that you know the decoration's going to be, and leave it. You'd think I'd heed my own advice, wouldn't you? And I'm done. I'm giving up at this point. What is these couple of lines there? They're going to be covered by something. This right here, it's going to be covered by a border. Don't stress yourself out over the little stuff. There you go. We're done.